What's up, everybody? Thralls of Metal here. I'm Jammin John.
Necrotic Nick.
And we are bringing you yet another album review, and one of two of the remaining album reviews that we have left here for 2024. We are going to go over the latest offering from Cyclops Cataract with Imperial Might. This actually came out on the 18th of November, but Scott, their guitarist slash keyboardist, reached out to us and asked if we would go over this album. Oddly enough, I went over their first album, Bestiary, back in 2021 for an episode of What's John Jamming, because that's what I did around that time, and maybe I'll do that again. I don't know, we'll get there. This band formed in Aberdeen, Scotland in 2018. Again, this is their second full length, and this whole thing kind of serves as a refresher course. I'm not sure I needed a refresher course because this album is actually vastly different.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is my first experience with Cyclops Cataract. Actually, Scott is a friend of mine as well, and he actually sent me a copy of his other project, I Don't Do Drugs, I Am Drugs, with their EP, The Savant on Ketamine. All of those things are just very interesting there. I went over that in a collection update. That was some wild, very like avant-garde, progressive death metal. I don't know. That one's hard to describe. And I feel like some of that kind of trickled into this project because admittedly I hadn't listened to the first album until very recently. We kind of did a comparison with the first album to this album for Cyclops Cataract. And yeah, no, I'm kind of in the same boat with John here where it's like, I don't know if these two albums are even that comparable because, man, one is decidedly different than the other. Whereas, at least, on the archives, they are described as blackened death metal. I think that's pretty fair, especially if you're kind of just talking about the first one. You have elements of both black metal and death metal. It's woven together with, like, interesting bits of atmosphere and, like, swells of synths and, like, almost kind of an industrial tinge at times. This album, however, takes it even farther. Like, this is just absolutely loaded with insane elements and weird transitions. And yeah, no, I can't just call this blackened death metal, even though those two elements are definitely present. So are a bunch of other ones.
Starts off with the track Marching Forward, and it kind of leads the record in. Lots of layers, heavily laden on the synths. I mean, that's pretty much the way I think most death metal records start out. Right off the bat, I noticed it sounded like the drums were programmed or electronic. I mean, one of the two, either it's a guy pushing buttons somewhere or a guy actually jamming on a kit. They do have a drummer listed, so I'm not really 100% what's going on there, but that's a thing. And with all these synths, of course, we're not going to leave it just to the normal spooky noises in the back, or some cellos or some strings, or normally what most people do. Nope, they've got bells and whimsical features, and that kind of kicks off this record.
Yeah, this album is chock full of everything. There's so much going on. This is like one of the busiest albums I think I've listened to this year. And I know we just went over that Bedsore album, which was also nuts. Ooh. But I feel like this is more densely packed and, definitely a different avenue. The first couple of things that kind of struck me in terms of the sound on here is it's kind of like in the same vein as like Strapping Young Lead, especially circa Alien, probably the most bonkers album that Strapping Young Lead ever released, and one of my favorites. And also, like, maybe a band like an All Noth Rock, too, where there's definitely, like, an industrial tinge to a lot of it, and there's a lot of synths. There's also just absolutely furious sections of blast beats and chugs and dissonant riffs, and then you kind of get into that devyish territory where all of a sudden things are lush and beautiful and whimsical. And that happens all the time on here. The dynamics and transitions on here can be so jarring. It's like, watching both like Hellraiser and, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs at the same time. If any of you have watched Fight Club, which I'm reasonably sure a good chunk of our fan base probably has, you know how Tyler Durden used to like displace in just a big old section of porn in the middle of a family movie. It's kind of like that. The jarring transitions can be just kind of like, whoa, what the hell happened?
And that happens really in like 95% of this record. Songs like Praying for the End of the World, you get isolated drum and bass, you get this big chuggy stomp that leads in, and really most of the time it's straightforward death metal, and I really like that. But then it cuts to whimsical streams, and it sounds like you're in a dark ride at Disneyland, and you're not really sure what's happening, and someone's playing a casino game, and you're really not sure what's happening, and Mickey Mouse is there, and everyone's taking acid, and you're dead.
That's how the last trip to Disneyland went, at least, I think. I'm not good with family vacations.
I'm not either.
Yeah, the atmosphere in here it's strange because, like, again, you're greeted to, like, so many different elements coming at you at multiple directions. Like, this is like 7 or 8 musical claymores going off around you, and you have to, like, hone in on one of the ball bearings that's hurling towards your skull. It's kind of like musical ADHD. Like, it's very rapid fire, and a lot of these songs are, I mean, I wouldn't say like short, but they are short for, I think, what they're going for here, because a lot of these songs have like lots of moving parts and layers and, you know, different musical seasonings and such. And I feel like they kind of get condensed down to the point where sections don't get enough room to breathe in order for you to, like, kind of like latch onto them. The song Regressive in particular comes in blasty. There's some cool, like, evil sounding harmonized riffs, and, you know, while you're kind of like getting locked in on that sound, it takes a shift to like more atmospheric prog. You're like, oh well, all right, I'll just get settled in here, and by the time you do, it's on to brutal death metal. And then it circles back to the opening riff, which is still blasty and aggressive, so it kind of plays off the brutal death metal angle a bit, but then it adds what sounds like fluttering horns in the background, which I was like, wait, did that actually happen? And by the time I was, you know, processing that, I think there was a theremin that was invited to the party. And I'll be honest, outside of like 50s and 60s sci-fi movies, I don't like theremins. They just get annoying really quick. This one only hangs out for a little bit, and then it is on to a flat-out slam breakdown. And all these elements are condensed into a song that I think runs about like 4 minutes, maybe 4 minutes and change. And it just becomes so jarring. Like, there's a lot of stuff that, you know, I think are like really good ideas, but they kind of just do the whole like square peg round hole thing. It's like, listen, we're just gonna try to make this fit. Like, this album doesn't necessarily pick like a single direction on a song. They pick multiple directions, or at least on most of these songs. They can't seem to decide whether or not, like, all right, we need this epic soaring part, but we need it to sound like, you know, like evil epic, not Disney epic. And sometimes it just reminded me of something strange, like Peace Written in Blood. You know, you got a lot of, like, you know, blast beats. Again, it's heavy and chuggy, like, you know, it's just very vicious sounding, and all of a sudden there's this big dropout to this very Spielberg-ish moment of wonder. Like, you can almost see the scene in your head where, like, the kid in the movie, because there's always a kid in the movie, that's looking up at something grand and wondrous, and I was like, wait, weren't we, what
Right.
Did we change channels? The melody itself, I mean, if I had to, like, pick out a specific movie that it reminded me of The Goonies, when, you know, they found the map up there and they asked Chunk to hold it because they knew he would drop it because he's a fucking idiot. It sounded almost exactly like that.
Yep.
And then it goes back into another thing, and again, like, this album's kind of hard to get a hold of.
Now, once again, I don't know if that's because of the production. The mix seems to change not only from song to song, but sometimes varies actually within the song. There seems to be a lot of leveling issues. The synths tend to bury the drums a lot. Sometimes they will bury the vocals, and sometimes they are also playing over top of the guitars, and I think that sometimes that's what makes these transitions sound so jarring or incomplete, because it tends to shift around so much. I feel like you need moments where everything's a little quieter, or at least just take the synths down and let the guitars go for a walk to make these transitions, because a lot of these transitions I think seem off. In fact, I think some of even the rhythms sound off. In the title track, Imperial Might, it just sounded like a couple times where the drums were either a little bit behind, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, because I was listening, and, you know, again, there's like so much going on in every song on here that it became, you know, kind of this just like din of like noise in certain pockets of this. Like, you know, you have a synth going, and then guitars, drums, vocals, again, and all these things are kind of fluctuating in this mix too. Like sometimes the vocals are out front, sometimes they're kind of buried in the back. Like there's a dynamic range thing on here that, you know, it doesn't work well with the album. You kind of need something where like the mix is a little bit more steady. But yeah, there were points in there where I really wasn't sure if the, you know, rhythm was off, or I was just hearing like something else almost kind of like taking place of a snare hit in my head just because it was so loud in the mix.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to tell. And honestly, like, again, dissecting some of these songs, there's lots of cool ideas on here. The Fall, while it's very all over the place and just kind of broken up into weird sections, there's some cool ideas on there. There's like a thrashy section on there that I think the main part of the riff is cool, though they add this weird pinch harmonic, I think, but there's also like a synth distortion there. I'm not really sure, but it was kind of a good break from like the blast beats and then the dropouts to the big epic swings and such. But this album wasn't all like super confusing. Actually, at an odd point, it all kind of started settling down around lesson in brutality, which doesn't sound like the point in an album where it would start making sense or slow down or, you know, anything like that. But oddly, it kind of was. And this is probably the first one on here where the transitions kind of smoothed out a bit.
Mm-hmm. And really from that point on, the record starts to come together. Both Breaking the Earth and Mobilizing Their Might are pretty much more cohesive songs. Like they're a lot more riff oriented. The transitions seem to be nailed pretty well. And although they occasionally jump off the beaten path, like Mobilizing Their Might, we're still at Disney and we're still at a dark ride. But it's not as bad, and they don't stick around with those whimsical parts as long. It seems to be, again, more riff-centric and more focused on making an actual song than it is going off into the wild blue yonder on peyote.
Yeah, this was the point where things started to click a little bit more. It also kind of started to slow down a bit. Like, you know, Lesson in Brutality definitely has its blast beats. There's, like, some fierce black metal sections on there that have a big Marduk-like energy to it. But there's a lot more groove, and again, it starts kind of slowing down. The transitions are less jagged, and Breaking the Earth was where it really started to kind of come together. Like, it was a slower song, it's a little bit more room for the atmosphere to breathe, and that's kind of an issue in here. There's not a lot of room for stuff to breathe. This one, they kind of wisely slowed it down, so like it's less, you know, cluttered. Like, you know, you get like good riffy chugs, and then like lush synths in the background, and even the dropouts to the more, you know, whimsical, epic stuff, it made more sense. And this is where, like, the Debbieisms really come out, because a lot of this started reminding me of, like, Accelerated Evolution. It has, like, again, those, like, big, bottom-heavy guitars, but also behind that you have this, like, just lush beauty, which, you know, honestly, at that point, it did kind of have, like, that Debbie production style where it was, like, the wall of sound, but the sound was more inviting. Mobilizing Their Might is actually probably one of my favorite songs in here, and it's a flat-out instrumental. And that's not really to say anything about, like, the vocals. Like, I think the vocals on here are pretty solid. Again, a lot of it has to do with the mix and them kind of frequently moving around. Like, there's a good, you know, alternating between blackened screams and, like, flat-out brutal growls on here. But I will say that during the more melodic stuff, especially this more dev-centric stuff, we'll call it, some cleaner vocals might have worked a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think it would have kind of captured the mood.
And it would have been an interesting dynamic twist that doesn't appear on the record yet. So when you do get to something that is both a little bit more calmed down and a little bit actually more focused, you would have something to make that stand out even further. Now, I'm not knocking an instrumental track. I used to be in an instrumental band, so I can't say anything against it. But having something like clean vocals or something to just make this stand out a little bit more probably would have been a good thing.
And as far as like the more like jarring all over the place stuff, I think where it does kind of work, or at least work better, is on the last track, Barbarossa. It's the longest song on the album. It's almost 9 minutes long, and with that time, they gave sections room to breathe. Like, it opens up with probably some of the heaviest riffs on the entire album, like heavy syncopated chugs. This band likes to do slow chugs over blast beats, and I love that shit. Like, that's just a brutal death metal trope.
We're on board for that.
Yeah, no, do that all day long. In fact, they did it well for part of the day here. But this one does, you know, kind of their thing on the rest of the album where it's just very wild and all over the place. And eventually, it does kind of like get a little bit stranger. Like, all of a sudden, like, it sounds like, you know, Lurch is playing the organ in the Addams Family. And, that's kind of backing up some of the riffs. And there's like this really interesting transition with probably one of the more like distinct leads in there. It sounds like the ghost of Dimebag Darrell playing over a Fear Factory breakdown, which I thought was kind of cool. But with this song being longer and, more, I think, intensive about laying on certain sections and even repeating some, it gelled a little bit better. And that's kind of like the big thing on here is, while this is very expressive, very experimental, it doesn't necessarily always gel. It's entirely too busy for its own good. There's a ton of cool ideas on here, but in terms of the construction as a whole, not all the pieces fit. This is like, knowing what you want to say, and then there's what you actually say. Approaching like a hot chick at the bar, and you got a pickup line in your mind, like, yeah, I'm gonna get her with this, and then you all of a sudden start blurting out shit like, hey, you remember when Artex died in Neverending Story? That was really sad. Would you like to go out with me? Can I buy you a beer? Yeah, I found a way to bring up Artex dying again. Isn't that great?
You miserable piece of shit.
Oh, man, I love that.
I needed a minute. Right there.
But yeah, sometimes the idea in your head doesn't necessarily come out like the way you thought it would. And I feel like that's kind of some of the issue on here. Like, this band tried really hard to just come out with something insane and, very expressive. And I mean, in death metal and blackened death metal, it can be hard to stand out. So yeah, you want to do some stuff to kind of spice up. Well, you threw every spice on here, and it just, kind of lost its way. But when it did find its way, it was honestly pretty good.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too. Like, it wasn't all bad. Like, I feel like I'm sitting over here just shitting on this record, and that's not the case. I found times were less cohesive than others, and I found especially times where the song would start out and be heavy and awesome, and by the time you get to the end of it, it was like 7 songs ago in one song. I'm gonna go ahead and give this 2.5 stars. There are some definite awesome riffy moments to latch on to that I find myself really loving in death metal. A lot of nods to things like Suffocation and Morbid Angel, again, which are things I love. A lot of great black metal sections, some blasty sections, some cold riffs, and that's all great. The problem I ran into was changing too much to being in a whimsical Disney movie when you also have death metal abound. Now, I understand, as a big Devin Townsend fan myself, I understand how you make the two of those go together and work out real well. The issue I had here was that some of it didn't work out real well, and the transitions were kind of rough, and you felt like you were squishing too many things in all at once, and then when you let your hands go, it all just kind of fell out on the table. That's kind of where I'm at. Nonetheless, it's still pretty solid listen, again, if you like things like Devin Townsend, the Devin Townsend Project, Strapping Young Lad, Morbid Angel, Suffocation, and Disney on Ice. You're probably really going to like this. I would recommend checking it out.
We're talking about Ice the drug, too.
Of course, right. We're not talking about No One Can Ice Skate.
I am also at a 2.5. There's a lot of potential in here. Like, that was the thing that I kind of pulled from this. Like, there's a lot of cool ideas. It's just, some assembly required. There's just too much going on at certain points. And, this album kind of gets off the rails multiple times and really struggles to get back on the rails. Where it does come together in some of the later tracks in here, I really dug that. In fact, some of that stuff sounded so vastly different from the earlier material on this album that I thought it was maybe like, say, for a different project, because there's a totally different vibe to it. It becomes a little bit more like progressive and more melodic, and honestly, it starts to kind of gel a little bit more. Again, this just feels like there's just too much going on. Like, strip some of this back, I think it might actually work. Still, I got to applaud the band for like really just kind of going for it. Yeah. But I will say that, this is a bit of a mess for me, but that isn't to say stop trying. Like, honestly, keep pushing this. Maybe, all this comes together. I just feel like there's, I don't know, just again, like some fine tuning on here that probably should happen to get this to come together, because I can draw a lot of comparisons to bands I really like. Strapping Young Lad, like there's alien vibes all over this. On All Noth Rock, and lots of just like nasty death metal riffs and like vicious black metal sections. I feel like all of this can come together at a certain point. It's just, well, not here. Still, I urge you guys to check this out. If you guys like challenging listens and you're looking for something technical and wild and pretty damn different at times, check this out. Give it a whirl. it's an interesting listen for damn sure. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also now have memberships. They are only 99 cents, and we will do more of our members-only streams, which we'll probably think about a theme for them at some point. Like, you know, we kind of want to make those a little bit, you know, different than our regular, very dumb streams. But we'll probably do those in January, as December is holiday apocalypse.
Yeah, I'm already tired.
Yep, no, I'm already almost done with it. We also have dumb emojis, and yeah, this is the new way to support the channel more directly. We also still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our t-shirts and hats. If you are interested in any of those, there's a link to thrallsmetal.com in the video description. And if you are interested in joining and becoming a member of this channel, I was going to say awesome channel, but I don't know if we're there yet.
It's a channel.
It's a channel.
You know, we have one.
But you can join it if you want, because there's a little join button down there.
And really, without all of you guys, we'd have a channel with just nobody would watch, and we'd be like, why are we down here? The fact that we do have a channel is pretty awesome, and it's because of you. Tons of things going on at Thralls of Metal, album reviews, although this is our second to last one for the year. Thank you for getting us through another year here, which is another thing. This channel's about to turn 6 years old. That's right, we're going into the first grade or kindergarten, or depends on whether or not you were held back, not a big deal. This channel's about to be 6 years old. We couldn't be more proud to be here. Thank you guys for just being a part of things. We appreciate you indefinitely, probably forever. We're about to celebrate 20,000 subscribers, which is nuts, because that's nuts. I can't believe that, to be honest, but here we are. So thank you, and another big thank you, and some more thank yous. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys absolutely rule. Tons of content coming your way. We're going to get back to like retro reviews, discography rankings, discussion pieces. You know, that'll all take place probably after all of our year-end lists, which are coming up soon too. So yeah, stay tuned for a bunch of stuff from us. And one more big thank you, because you're awesome, and we will catch you later.